suited is always a 3-bet. And every other version, even the worst ones, we are always calling. So the connectivity and being up against a wide button range, closing the action, definitely speak favorable for the hand. Let's see if we make it a little bit worse. As soon as the 6 becomes a 5 or lower, it never 3-bets. So the connectivity is quite important, and as soon as the 5th card becomes somewhat of a dangler, the folds start to increase with the weak suits. Here we have all single suited versions, except for the queen high single suited, that's still a call, and slight difference only. But yeah, the main difference is that here we still have connectivity between all 5 cards, so it's worth a 3-bet with my holding, and it becomes slightly more so the more connectivity we add. So we proceed in 3-bet. We are slightly deeper, but I think it's still not that big of an issue. On this board, I'd say it favors the 3-better out of position, of course, who has a lot of king high rundown, ace high rundown, high cards in general. But on the other token also has a lot of aces that not always, since there are only 3 remaining cards, there's a high chance that they are not really, that they're not broadways or middle connected cards, or so to speak. I mean, having like just the ace, 7-6, deuce, double suited or whatnot, obviously isn't a very great hand that we want to fist pump get it in here. So yeah, I'd say there's quite a bit of c-betting going on. It's not a board where the out-of-position player really has to worry about the in-position player. But on the same token, I still see a healthy checking frequency here because, like I said, there are plenty of hands. Think about also ace-ace, queen, 4-4. Like, these hands don't really have improvement potential along the streets, and they can get into a lot of trouble since every card between a queen and a 6 bring in straights. Plenty of obviously, when the board is rainbow, there's always a high chance flush draw comes on the turn. So yeah, keeping that in mind now with my actual hand, I say it's a good c-betting hand because even though we unblock a king, but we block a lot of his continues that are hands like a king high rundown that has like a king and a high straight draw. The same applies. We block a 9, which is great. We have a backdoor flush draw. We have a nut gut shot. So we do have some guaranteed or quote unquote guaranteed equity. That the gut shot obviously is nutted, but the 9 not necessarily, but still a pretty good card if we get just called on the flop. So I'd say it's a very good hand to bet half pot. Also, it's not really comfortable. It could probably just make it borderline as a check call, but we are not really. By betting, button almost always represents a king or better, like a good king or 2 pairs up. He's not really prone. There are not many natural bluffs. I guess something like Jack 9, 10 9, although any kind of the similar hands that we have, they make also pretty good stabs, since he also knows that we will see and envision how we are actually supposed to play our bare aces. But obviously it can be that immediately started to apply pressure. But I think, yeah, my hand is definitely a decent half pot size candidate. So now we dive into vision, and we can see on this board that our hand is almost always betting, sometimes checking with a double flush draw, but with a backdoor flush draw, always betting. So the hand that we had, and we see the overall frequencies is somewhat what I described, that we're betting half the time, checking half the time, and then we split up between full pots and half pots, which is also quite common, that similar as in 4-card PLO, where some of the medium hands go into a potting range, probably almost no bet folds in that range, whereas the half pot size bet becomes more polarized. Yeah, so 12% bet folds, but yeah, that's pretty neglectable. Whereas if we bet half pot and we get jammed, there's almost half of the times folds going on. So like I said, yeah, our hand would fit in that polarizing category in a way that it's a bluff. When we get raised, we have to fold, but it does a very good job in denying equity and getting him to fold basically hands for bluff prevention and whatnot. So since we also wanted to find out what happens if we do check, how often the button actually, we can see the button is quite aggressive on this board. So he's stabbing half the time for half pot, and out of position is actually check folding quite a bit. See if we get to filter for aces. Yeah, so 40%, we have half the time our range consists of aces and 40% of them are folding. So it is these kind of boards, even though they look rather dry, although let's call them semi-dry, they're still immediately presenting a difficult time for aces. And they are, if we go back to our action, they're oftentimes checking in the first place. And yeah, are just forced to check fold. So 60% of our aces are checking, and then 40% of those are folding. So that's definitely quite a bit. Okay, to be more precise, actually our 3-betting range consists 41% of aces, and then our checking range on the flop is half of the times aces. So, and if we want to find out how, for example, if as soon as we do have a king, which is the clue, the pivot, like the key card on this board, obviously, we see it plays much more aggressively with a mix, healthy mix between potting and betting half pot. To be more precise, if we do have pocket kings or the nuts, we are never full potting, but and also slow playing a decent amount of the time. We can see checking most of the time with 2 flush draws, backdoor flush draws, or 0 backdoor flush draws, but obviously also quite a bit of mixing going on. Oftentimes with aces, obviously ace, ace, king, king, it's a tiny category only, but these hands are, since they don't have any backdoors, although apart from flush draw, potential flush draw, but no backdoor straight draws, they are played more aggressively. And I imagine the strongest hands like king, king, queen, jack are more prone to slow play. Yeah, so we know that although by betting, our opponent is not going to call lightly with like any parent straight draw, like some kind of 7-6-5-4 type of hand. So we just get too many folds if we bet all our strongest hands. So it's definitely important to slow play a decent amount of kings. And when we face a bet, we just check call for the same reason. We expect out of position to have plenty of bluff stabs here. As we can see, he's folding 42%. So definitely good to keep that in mind. Have a good, basically the main takeaways. Aces are not happy about this flop and are forced to check fold quite frequently. Having a king allows us to be much more aggressive, and the nuts are going to get slow played quite frequently. If we go back into the hand now, unfortunately I missed that c-bet and I went for the check, which is a big mistake. Rather, yeah, because even though we can probably just about check call a half pot size bet, it's not as profitable at all compared to betting ourselves and potentially just get the fold straight away, or if getting called, having still improvement potential, bluffing potential on a jack or a 10, and so on. So yeah, by check calling, our opponent is, apart from hands that are similar to ours, something like jack, jack 9, 10, 10, 5, like blocking a board pair and having like a pocket pair that blocks the high straight draws. These probably would make good stabs. Most of the time, also especially how population tendencies go when they are kind of under bluffing, playing more straightforward. So oftentimes when you do face a bet, it's a decent king or 2 pairs plus. So we are not doing great at all, obviously, against that range. Luckily, he decides to check back, and we get to the turn on which we improve. I decide to check here. I think we can go either way. let's see what the solver would do, even though this hand class, as we saw, is almost always betting. So here we can see that our hand prefers to bet when it has a single flush draw, and only plays very aggressively when it has the 3 of a flush draw. Makes sense, obviously, in this terms that the times that in position is slow playing probably rather infrequently, and the times he does, well, let's see what happens after potting, if there's a pot folding range. It would actually also call a pot size stab here if we were to be in position, and we see it's actually a pot fold here, since in position is almost never going to be light here. It's very often going to be a king with a flush draw and something else going on. So our hand is drawing pretty slim. So there are actually 30% of pot folds, which is also important to keep in mind that even with low SPRs, there are definitely spots where pot folding, decent amount of equity. I mean, we do have a 9, we have a gut shot, we have the pocket queens, we have the third nut flush draw. So all in all, it sounds like a pretty decent package, but we have to keep in mind how vulnerable the equity is, so how easily it is dominated. Basically, like I said, as soon as he has a higher flush draw and the king, we are all of a sudden drawing pretty slim. And probably, I'm not going to go back into it, but probably in position does, similar to out of position, also decide to slow play a number of pocket kings that just block too much of the continues, kings with a high gut shot, basically, as we saw, because he doesn't really benefit from making aces fold. As we saw, aces are forced to fold quite often. And but as said before, actually with that was only with having 3 hearts, whereas with 2 hearts, the regular flush draw, we are just checking, which makes sense that we have improved, but we're still not thrilled to get money in. There's also a chance that he checks back a decent number of mediocre kings, so we're just kind of value towning ourselves if we put money here and get called. There are not many hands that we need to protect against, apart from these low wheeled straight draws, but they're obviously not that big of a concern. And he goes ahead and bets on a bigger side now, but we should have a pretty easy call. So, since against, anything else but kings with, like I said, king X with a higher flush draw, against anything else, we are doing pretty well. Now turning the set, rivering the set, after he bets the turn, so there are 2 different ways of approach the spot. One would be that giving him that we have a very good bluff catcher now, third nuts actually, so kind of underrepresented, very unlikely, although that we improved on this card. I mean, quote, not completely impossible, but a rather small fraction of our range probably makes a straight here, or like top 2 or something that played this way. So I'd say perceived our range looks a lot like aces with a gut shot on the turn there. Yeah, or like ace king probably would have bet, but I think aces like medium aces that for same reasons didn't really want to building a pot on the turn, but was strong enough to check call. So there's a chance. So if he did actually turn semi bluff the turn with some kind of straight draw that picked up a lot of equity, maybe nut flush draw like 4-3 ace 4-3 with diamonds, something like that, so that oftentimes he will be end up with 0 showdown value, or like a low 1 pair hand, so he may feel compelled to bluff. But on the other token, if he did bet the turn for value, like with any 2 pair, maybe he checked actually the flop with something like 9-5 or something, so I don't think he will go again for thin value, or kings up for that matter, king deuce for example. So he's unlikely to bet these hands, but I mean, I don't really rep many bluffs obviously, but I still think I would get a decent number of calls. Maybe it's a bit too thin to pot, but going a half pot or something that is it becomes quite tempting as soon as he has like something like kings up, maybe a jack or a 10 blocker. Like I said, I don't think these hands will bet, but they may very well call a bet. So I'd say it's highly player dependent. If you have a read on somebody who is river aggressive, both thin value and bluffy, then go ahead and check call. But if he is rather passive, which a lot of players are, I'd say the majority, both of regulars and recreational players, are rather passive on the river, not finding all the bluffs they could in theory. And we see he actually had king 5 that he checked back on the flop. King 5 deuce to be precise. Then on the turn he went for the value rather big, protecting his hand now that the flush draw got available. And then on the river he just checks back the king 5. Like I said, he's beaten by king queen and some kind of jack 10 combo. But ace jack 10 more likely that would have bet in the first place or on the turn. But yeah, oftentimes we don't have to overcomplicate things, like not thinking how much our perceived range looks like, and rather stick to the most important factor, which is the tendencies, the game plan basically of our opponents. And that, like I said, for the most part is just getting to showdown whenever there's like a possible change in nuts on the river. So that definitely helps to further strengthen our reads on this opponent, which we encountered throughout the series. Seems like he's leaving, or is not anymore at the other tables. In the beginning of the series, he was on 3 of my tables, so it looks pretty like a standard reg in that sense. His preflop stats went down from, I think, 50 or 49 now to 38, so his preflop range has become more aligned. Probably still a bit too wide in all positions, but his post-flop tendency or behavior is a lot like a standard regular that is like polar on the flop, doesn't want to get check raised with this type of hand, and also likes to first see a turn card before then putting in money on the turn and taking the showdown on the river. I think that was a pretty interesting hand and important to analyze. And like in the future, as an adjustment, like I said, I would consider when I do improve on the river to go for value myself instead of hoping to bluff induce. Here we have a very amazing pre-flop hand. We flop mediocre. I think it's a decent check back. We don't really need much protection, and it's a hand that can continue on a lot of turns, but obviously hates to get check raised on the flop, so it looks like a decent check back candidate, since it will pick up additional equity so often, like in this case. And players are quite aggressive. I'd say we can check in the solver, especially about the big blind play here. I would suppose he's supposed to lead a decent frequency, like 20 to 30%. Since a big blind range against the cutoff open is still rather tight, I guess around the 40-ish% VPIP, and will exclude a lot of the very low rundowns, but have plenty of these middle-ish cards that are hitting this board. So yeah, I think he should have some flop leads, and this turn pot size probe is quite common also from like not very creative players, I'd say, although knowing that they can apply a lot of pressure and that my overpair heavy range has a lot of problems continuing versus pot here, even if I do hit a flush draw. So even more so, it's important to protect our range. So first we see how it plays out, and then we will check vision. Fortunately, we don't improve on the river, and he ends up potting, and I decide to fold. It's just, sure, players are capable of pot side bluffing there, but I doubt that he's bluffing 33% or more that justifies a call here. I do block a 9, which is nice, but obviously it's still yeah, when players don't find enough bluffs, if he's only bluffing like 10s and 9s, yeah, it's still not enough against the unless I have a read. Like if I know somebody is capable of bluffing and very prone to do so at a high frequency, then I think that would be a decent bluff catcher. Just having blocking a jack and a 9, the jack in the terms of blocking some of his showdown value, so that he's more likely to have like an 8x or 7x or no board pair at all, and the 9 obviously blocking direct straight. But I haven't had that impression of that player so far. So let's see how Vision would play the spot. So we can see here in both Big Blind versus UTG, pretty healthy leading range for half pot, as well as Big Blind against button. Same applies. We were in the cutoff, but yeah, the ranges don't really differ that much in terms of the frequencies. And yeah, pretty sure our hand is a very natural check back. Yep, indeed. Actually, the strongest ones my hand could consider betting. Actually, just for value, it's strong enough to call a check raise, but yeah, not happy about it. And now on a blank river turn, bringing a flush draw. Yeah, out of position is supposed. Here in Vision it's only 75%, but it's probably kind of close to pot size. And we in position are gonna call whenever we have a flush draw. Yeah, so that was just to confirm on these two streets basically, although like I said, flop, definitely we should expect out of position to lead a reasonable frequency. And then, yeah, his range, that skews his range rather like in Vision, but still even after he checks the flop is obviously quite balanced between value and bluffs. But then even from his on the turn, he finds again a reasonable number of both bluffs and value for sure. So if we see, yeah, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, probably even more. Yeah, both same frequency are betting quite reasonably often. Having like an ace blocker is preferred, and we see with a flush draw it's more prone to check, but goes in both lines. But yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with I played my hand. And then on the same token, we always have that theme throughout the years in both regular PLO and 5-card PLO that players are not finding enough donks on the flop, or actually kind of prefer to slow play their value, that old school thinking of checking to the preflop raiser. So yeah, there's a decent chance that he actually is maybe not donking the nuts or strong hands on the flop often enough, although in terms of GTO philosophy. So yeah, I feel pretty happy how I played my hand there. And unless I have a solid read that somebody is bluffing in certain spots, I will always fold the river there against pot. Since we also have some, we will all have some slow plays nuts that we check back, or we have something like 2-pair with a straight blocker. I mean, in a certain way, 2-pair and 1-pair or aces there are probably relatively the same if we're only up against straights or bluffs. But there's always that offset chance that players do pot like a set for value. And I mean, there was a low straight. Some like good aggressive players would also pot the second straight there on the river for value. So it really is depending on the players. But now let's continue on table 1. Decent hand pre-flop. I'd say, as with many, this is like right on the edge between opening and folding, given that it's double triple suited and several gaps between the ranks. But nonetheless, we saw the button, it looks rather straightforward, not overly passive, but not overly aggressive, so less of a chance of getting 3-bet or called there. And yeah, we get the chance to play in position deep against the small blind. So, and I think, yeah, flopping a wrap there no showdown value, definitely a nice semi-bluff candidate. With a pair, or like a pocket pair in my hand of any rank, like higher than a 10 or queen, I would rather check it back. And getting check raised for the same reasons, not blocking any of the board pairs. And even if he's bluffing himself, it's oftentimes going to be a strong semi-bluff, like a nut flush draw with at least a gut shot or a jack or something. So we're not doing great. I don't think I need to call there to kind of keep him honest. I have much better hands. Like I just elaborated, I want to have some, if I had queens there, I could definitely see myself calling, since now I'm ahead of all his bluffs, but without a pair, it's a pretty weak hand. Table 3, it's pretty close. We can actually check that in Vision with the 4-card rundown, but tri-suited, not in Vision, in the preflop solver. So interestingly enough, the solver is folding 100% of the exact combo, even perfectly double suited. Seems like the deuce is just 3, 4, 5. So it seems like we really need, from the small blind, to have again all 5 cards working together. So 4-card rundown with a complete dangler, even double suited, is just not nutted enough that doesn't, when we call from the small blind, obviously increases the chance of the big blind, as we can see here, calling 30%, squeezing 10%. Whereas if we fold the ranges of the big blind stay rather static, but nonetheless there's still a decent chance, as we saw there, 40% chance of a 3-way pot or a squeeze pot. So definitely not a great outcome. So we really have to not get carried away by, especially when you guys, when you transfer from 4-card PLO to 5-card PLO, to just think, okay, Jack 10-9, awesome connectivity, the magical Jack 10 included, double suited. Well, no, it doesn't matter that the 5th card is a dangler. Can see here of Jack 10-9, Jack 10-9-8. Yeah, we actually fold half of the combos. So it's really important that the 5th card is playing towards the rest of the hand as well. So let's see if the same applies for the queen high rundown, and we see yes, there are now all double suited combos do call, but still mainly folding, and even some double suited. Just let's call it all the double suited. Perfect. A calling, and no side cards, as long as they're danglers, doesn't really matter. And then only once we add it to a connected card, somewhat connected, now also 3-bets become an option, but still folding all the single suited versions apparently, and just calling the double triple and 3-betting the perfect double suited ones. And let's see the last. So even as strong as King Queen Jack 10 with the deuce, it's still folding almost half of the time. Does already consider 3-betting though, with the perfect suits, especially a King High and a Queen High suit. But it's rather close between calling and 3-betting. So it definitely makes a difference getting a bit higher. And I guess as soon as we have a dangler in it, it now even the perfect double suited versions are fold. So as always, these are probably all very close to break even either way, or indifferent. So it highly depends who's in the button and who's in the big blind, that a hand can become highly profitable as soon as there's like a recreational player involved. But it's important to keep in mind that these hands are definitely not as good as you'd assume. And from the small blind, we have to be really careful in these spots. So it was definitely there with the try single suit. Obviously, the Jack 10-9-8 deuce single suited was a snap fold. And like I said, so I'd say I would call against some opponents. I would call with the double suited hand there, but seems like the single suited version obviously is much worse and is even against somewhat suboptimal or not that good players still a pretty easy fold. It's just not gonna play post flop strong enough to justify playing out of position there. Let's see a couple of hands going on. So table 4, pretty weak jacks, but given that there are already 3 players involved, 2 of them recreationals, and we are all somewhat deep, so I think my implieds go up. And the hand isn't really that difficult to play out of position. I'm definitely not going to overcommit with like a second or third set or a low flush or flush draw. So I think it's definitely these type of hands that are not solver approved to continue pre-flop, but definitely have much more implied odds as soon as they are recreational players. When you the times you do hit big, you have much higher implieds. Table 3. Hitting the trips, I'd say we can go both ways. It's also, I'm going to check that out in the solver. Again, depending on player tendencies, I'd say unblocking a king or a queen is good, since I would c-bet block here to get called by kings and queens. Jacks are probably not that important. If we could choose, we probably wouldn't want them that much, but it's still a chance that he also check calls jacks, but it becomes more the lower we go in the pocket pairs, obviously the lower the chance that he's check calling the flop even with them. But I can see also myself checking back, so let's see what Vision would do. And we can see here the solver is almost always checking back a hand like mine. So let's see how he's playing overall with his trips. Because he's betting 60% of the time, so quite aggressive. It's not a board that's like freezing the action as some other boards like monotone boards. So we see here Ace X is mostly betting, more prone to check back with 2 backdoor flush draws, betting most aggressively with the weaker the backup. Let's see how actually Ace King is doing. Because there are obviously 2 sides. I said I want to unblock a king or a queen, but on the same token, obviously, they have the chance of dominating weaker trips. So, yeah, they still played pretty aggressively. Let's see if we block several Broadway. If that now, okay, it's still just the strength of the hand that's more important than like blocking continues. So I guess if we don't have any of these high kickers, then we are more prone to slow play our hand. Still betting at a reasonable frequency. Same topic applies. As the less backdoors we have, backdoor flush draws, the more prone we are to play aggressive, since we have worse playability throughout the streets. But yeah, let's see how any ace jack jack. Yeah, so having a pocket pair seems to be let's see if kings are similar. So less boat outs. Okay, kings are still quite aggressive, whereas queens are again passively played. So yeah, definitely hands that kind of want to control the pot. And because let's see if out of position is supposed to check raise. Okay, out of position never check raises actually. But still, they make, if our hand is not strong enough to go for 3 streets of value, oftentimes it's good to start with a check on the flop to keep their range wider, and then we can still comfortably go for 2 streets on turn and river and most runouts. Table 2, too wide of an open, but with a tight small blind and the very aggressive recreational that I want to play pots with in position. Not happy about getting 3-bet, obviously, since we have less often, we can outplay our opponent less often the lower the SPR, since he has an easy time of just potting a lot of flops. But still, obviously, a decent hand. And yeah, table 3, we call the probe. Table 1 now, I think I defended the big blind against small blind open, flop win check check, and now on this turn, prime card obviously to bluff. And table 2, not gonna put any money in the pot. And table 3, facing 2.5 pot size bets. Let's see what he shows up with. Yeah, ace king. So definitely, yeah, I guess in theory it's never a fold. But in practice, I could see myself against certain opponents We saw that throughout the parts, that they are not always like pot the river there, that we with their nuts, they are rather trying to get this bet around the half pot size region. They just want to increase their chances of getting called. But we see that the flop, why we check the solver especially decides to check back there, and then we have an easy time calling 2 streets. But we keep in mind that he is betting also smaller with the nuts there. And like I said, table 2, not gonna bluff there. It's just too high of a chance that he has aces, kings, or any other pocket pair he's calling. And he actually does have aces that he doesn't bet at any point, which is important to keep in mind, obviously, that he's not. So I change it from very aggressive to just recreational. Since that is non-standard, I would expect from an aggressive player that he's very aggressive, straightforward, betting there with the nut boat. Table 3, similar as before, this time at least similar to a hand that we had on table 1 a couple of minutes ago, but now at least we have perfect double suitedness. So I'd say these hands, let's check it in the solver, but they have just pretty high playability throughout all positions. Let's see how. I think the cutoff just sat down, so we are effectively in the cutoff, but let's see how the solver approaches these types of hands. So we can see here from middle position, it starts with one combo to mix in opens, and I guess as soon as we go to the cutoff, it should become, now we have almost all double suited versions now do become an open, especially the perfect suited ones. And then with the 2 of the queen high suit. So like I said, I think these hands, they are pretty good. Although I could also in certain tables I would open it from earlier positions as well. As always, it's important that the cards play all together, and as soon as we don't have that additional, we have 2 gaps only now instead of 3, and the 8-7-6 connectivity obviously is quite huge as well. So now this hand becomes a fist pump open, even single suited with weak suits, even though it is pretty much a 0 EV. All the weak single suited hands and only the double suited versions are netting a reasonable profit there. These hands are quite decent. Whereas the hand on table number 4 is closer, obviously having less connectivity towards Broadway, the middle part of the board hurts our hand. On this table here against a very loose loose recreational player, definitely being deep or semi-deep, definitely worth playing it. Let's see also how if the solver would play it as a default for 100 bigs deep against GTO. And we can see here he wouldn't. Let's see if we don't have that additional gap. As soon as we have the perfect 4-card rundown, we are calling almost all or all double suited versions. Let's see if we have the gap at the bottom. No, it can't be a gap. If it's more without the queen, it's similar. And if we do, no, it kind of makes sense. We need to overcome, like when we have that handicap of having the low suits and the low cards already, then we need perfect connectivity. Or in terms of having at least that perfect 4-card rundown, and then the overcard of the queen helps in boosting it in terms of having the high suit and having some connectivity between the queen 8. And also I think having like a pocket pair there. Let's see how a hand like 4-card rundown with a pocket pair. So we can see here perfect connectivity with a pocket pair is actually liked by the solver. And even with a gap, it is still hovering around the 0 EV mark. So again, we can make it player dependent whether or not we call. Let's see if the pocket pair becomes lower. It becomes more of a fold. Even with the connectivity. So having a pocket 8s over pocket 6s is definitely, it's still a difference. And then pocket 7s are still in the middle there. when the EV differences are so marginal, it's not a big difference though, but it's always important like to see where the tipping points are, where the thresholds lay when making our decisions. But the final decision always depends on the player, obviously, and the table that we're up against. Otherwise, from the button, if there's also a recreational player in the blinds, that definitely gives us more, as mentioned before, increases our implieds. Table 3, we call a 3-bet, flop, top pair, and a full wrap. So we just shove. Don't think there's any merit in just calling. If my hand would be slightly weaker, let's say a top pair and an open-ender, I would just call, since now we're definitely not pushing that much equity. But with this type of hand, we can be even quite a bit ahead when players decide to 3-bet. Also some kind of lower rundowns that we have a draw that's dominated. He did have, it's pretty standard, I think, from his part. No backdoor flush draw, definitely not at equity or equity against everything, but rather poor playability on a decent number or on a reasonable number of turn cards. So it makes sense for him to just pot it there instead of like half potting or something. I'd say this is a typical hand where with good backdoor, with at least one nut backdoor flush draw, it becomes a half pot, but without it, it's fine as a full pot. Table 2, not much to talk about, just check folding there. And table 4, turning the second nuts. Definitely when he checks to us, we want to bet for value there. Against the regular, I would sometimes check to avoid the trap and to get maybe induce a bluff on the river or something. But against a recreational player who play a lot of double suited stuff, so plenty of weaker flushes in their hands, they will also continue drawing when they have 2 pairs of sets. So a lot of value to be gained basically by betting, and unfortunately he folds. I think that's a good stopping point. We didn't get through that much of the footage, but we made like medium dives, so to speak, like not deep dives, not very shallow, into a lot of different spots, which I think is cool in terms of learning on a broad variety of subjects by having not only like not trying to perfectionalize the spot, but to just get a better overall understanding which parts of our range we are betting or checking in certain situations, and the same on pre-flop, just getting a grasp how the solver approaches certain hands and where the thresholds lay, and then we can still adjust accordingly to the players at the table for our final decision. So I would never call out a student make it like for opening or folding a certain hand that the solver would play otherwise when it's a very like marginal, like 0.1 EV decision or something. So it always comes down to the players you're up against. All right, see you guys in the next part. That was Alien Slayer for Runner1.com. Take care.